Over 560,000 new pieces of malware are detected every single day, and Windows users are a prime target for malware attacks. So it's not a question of if you'll run into something shady, it's when you will run into something shady. And sure, the smartest thing to do is probably just avoid clicking random things altogether, but let's be honest, that's not always practical. And the truth is, you can actually click and open files and programs in a safer way if you know what you're doing. So in this video, I will show you how to use a simple tool called Sandboxie Plus, which allows you to run almost any file, program, or browser inside a fully isolated sandbox. Now, Sandboxie Plus is a free open source tool which creates secure, disposable sandbox environments on your Windows system. And you can think of a sandbox as a controlled virtual container, like an isolated environment which traps anything inside it. When you run a program inside a sandbox, it has no direct access to your system's files or registry. It operates under heavily restricted permissions, and also any changes made are confined to the sandbox and discarded once the sandbox is deleted. Now, to install this tool, navigate to the sandboxie-plus.com and then click on downloads from the left-hand sidebar and then scroll down to the stable build sections. Here you'll see two versions, Sandboxie Classic, which has legacy UI and minimal features, and also Sandboxie Plus, which has modern interface and enhanced functionality. You should go with Sandboxie Plus, and unless you're an ancient system, just download the 64-bit version, which covers most modern Windows installations. Once you download it, run the installer and select your language, and then you can accept the license agreement and use all the default options for the installation. And once everything is complete, you can just launch the application. The first time you run it, you will go through a setup wizard and it will ask you a bunch of questions, and you can safely click through using all the default options unless you have a specific reason to customize the behavior. After setup, you will see the Sandboxie Plus control panel, and by default, you'll see that there's already one sandbox environment created for you, which has the name default box. Now you can use that or you can create a new one, and if you want to create a new one, you can just click sandbox on the menu and then choose create new box. You can give it a name like test environment or Chrome sandbox and so on. You can choose a box type, and for most users, standard sandbox type will be ideal, but you can also explore the other ones. And once everything is selected, just click next and then finish. You will now have a secure container in which you can run any application or file in isolation. Now you can run programs in your sandbox environment in several ways. The first would be to just right click on your sandbox name and then select run and then select run a program, and then you can enter the path or the name of the executable like chrome.exe or notepad.exe. And another way would be to right click the sandbox again and then choose run and then run from the start menu. Here you will see several tabs. For example, desktop, which will show shortcuts on your desktop, and then programs is basically all installed apps on your system, and then all files and folders basically allows you to browse and select any executable or script in the entire disk. For example, let's say you want to run Chrome inside the sandbox, then you can simply right click on the sandbox name and then select run and then choose run a program, and then you can type chrome.exe into the prompt and then hit enter. A new Chrome window will launch, but this one is going to be sandbox, and you'll immediately notice a yellow outline around the browser window. Now this yellow border is basically a visual indicator that says the application is running inside the sandbox, completely isolated from your main system. Now to illustrate that further, I can go to the Chrome Web Store, for example, and then I can install the first random extension I see here, and it will get added to my browser as expected, but in reality, that extension will only exist inside the sandbox. Now, if I close the sandbox Chrome and open the regular Chrome on my actual host system, that extension will not be there. It never even touched my real browser, and that's just the beauty of sandboxing. You can safely test browser extensions, suspicious files, or even potentially harmful add-ons, all without risk to your real profile or system configuration. Now, let's take this a step further with a more practical use case. Let's say that I receive an email with an attachment, and maybe it looks like a PDF, but I suspect that it might contain malicious code or an executable file disguised as a document. And naturally, I will not be sure if it's safe, so instead of opening it directly on my main system, I can launch Chrome inside the sandbox and then go to my email email inbox and then download the attachment. And then when I click show in folder, it will appear and be saved in my downloads folder. But the thing is, that file isn't actually going to be on my host system. Even the file explorer window that opens is going to be running inside the sandbox. In other words, it's going to be in an isolated environment. And again, you can tell this because it has the yellow highlighted border. Now, if I open the file from here, it will run entirely in the sandbox. So even if it's malicious, in most cases, it will not break out of the sandbox or infect my real system. Now, you can tweak your sandbox's behavior and its security by right-clicking the sandbox name and then selecting sandbox options. From here, you can do a lot of things like changing the visual indicator, like the window title or the highlighted border color. You can drop administrator rights, which basically removes elevated privileges from any program running in the sandbox and basically restricts those sandbox processes to standard user permissions instead of administrator rights. You can also restrict resource access by choosing different programs to have access to specific folders or files, or maybe simply block their access entirely. And you can even block internet access for anything running inside that sandbox. And to do that, you would go to network options and then selecting block network access by denying access to network devices and then simply just clicking OK. You would then see a status indicator that says no iNet next to that sandbox, and any program you run inside that sandbox environment will now have no internet connectivity, while everything on your host system will remain unaffected. This can be especially useful when testing suspicious software, which you might suspect attempt to call home or download malware or even exfiltrate your data. Additionally, if you ever want to move a file from a sandbox environment to your real host system for whatever reason, you can also do that too. You can just right-click on your sandbox in the control panel and then select recover files. And if the sandbox contains any files like downloads or saved documents, you'll be able to browse and select them. So you can just pick the ones you want and then click recover. Keep in mind that this will copy the file out of the isolated sandbox environment and then place it onto your actual host system. And on the other hand, if you want to delete everything, like maybe if you're done testing or you want to completely wipe everything inside the sandbox, you can just right-click on the sandbox and then choose delete contents and then confirm it by clicking yes. This would instantly erase all the data, temporary files, and program traces inside that environment and leave it clean and ready for the next time you use it. One more thing worth mentioning is that after you install the Sandboxie Plus, you'll notice a new option added to your right-click context menu. Now, whenever you right-click on a file, folder, or executable, you would see an option that says Run Sandbox. Now, I think this is by far the quickest and the easiest way to run anything in an isolated environment, because with just a few clicks, you'll be given the choice to either run it inside an existing sandbox, or you can even create a new one on the fly, customizing it to your needs. This option basically streamlines the whole process and allow you to sandbox anything, but it all comes down to preference, so you can open and run any programs in any way you want. Now, sandboxing is really powerful and a very useful tool, but it's always important to understand its limits. I mean, sure, it dramatically reduces the risks by isolating processes from your main system, but it's definitely not bulletproof. So for example, an advanced malware can sometimes detect that it's running in a sandbox and delay its malicious behavior, or in some cases even escape the sandbox through vulnerabilities or flaws in the host system. So while sandboxing gives you a much safer environment to test and explore unknown files, it's not a replacement for good judgment. So always try to keep that in mind while using this. If you found this video useful, consider subscribing and maybe share with someone who clicks and downloads everything they see online. As always, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.